Okay. Can everyone see a PowerPoint slide that says the fundamentals of data and mapping in planning processes? Great.
Yes.
All right. Success. Um, let's see. Turn that off for a sec. Okay. Just before we begin, a couple of housekeeping items. You'll see throughout the slideshow there are links to data and mapping sources. All of these links are accessible and they'll take you to those sources of information. This slideshow will be made available following the presentation. So if you like a copy, you can, I have many of your emails, but if we haven't corresponded before, you can leave your email in the chat and I can send it to you in the next few days. And as I'm going along and as Pete is assisting, feel free to ask questions, raise your hand, chime in. We can address questions along the way.
And I can monitor the chat since Kyle's doing the main presentation. If you prefer to throw it in the chat, I'll just monitor or I'll pop up with that periodically.
Awesome. Thank you, Pete. Okay, so on our agenda today, we'll be diving into two related topics, the use of and role of data in planning, along with mapping and the use of mapping tools and software for spatial analysis and planning. So we'll first look at how data is used in town planning processes, and more specifically, the municipal plan. We'll then explore ways in which data can be incorporated effectively into those planning processes and along with pitfalls that should be avoided when working with data. Then we'll transition into mapping and we'll look at some key mapping tools and explore the use of several of these tools for planning in greater depth. And we'll conclude with providing a list of available data and spatial tools that planning commission members, volunteers, town officials, zoning administrators can use for planning projects. Oh, let's get too far ahead there. So in order to plan effectively, we need a strong understanding of the current and historical development of our environment. Data, research, studies, and analyses all help to inform our understanding and to guide decision-making and planning processes. So collecting data for planning processes can help in several ways. First, our tools and methods for collecting data can help guide policy and planning decisions in local plans, bylaws, and other initiatives. That is, making informed decisions based on available data is important for developing a long-term vision for where we want our community to be. Data can also shed light on information gaps or where we may need to conduct further studies. For example, the data that we have available may indicate there are unemployment issues in our town, but the root cause of these issues is unclear. So through data collection, we can find gaps or blind spots where we may need additional data, and we may need to brainstorm about how we can perhaps create this data locally. Finally, data can pinpoint current issues and problems, which can help prioritize town actions and policies. For example, conducting a housing study can provide insights into whether there's a housing problem or how severe that problem is. And it can also provide some possible actions or strategies to address it. So now that we've gone into some detail on data collection, there are several different types of data that are typically used in town plans. The first, one of which is qualitative data. So for planning, this qualitative data is typically taken from stakeholder engagement sessions, many of you are probably familiar with public forums. It's a way to get members of the public involved in the planning process and to share their opinions, their perspectives. And this can help to inform the plan and the policies in the plan. We also have quantitative data, and this is generally expressed as a number. Quantitative data sets for planning purposes often include median income, number of households, the population or population age, and total housing units. This data can help inform our understanding of certain demographic and development trends over time, especially if we're looking at maybe a 10, 20, or 30-year period of data. And this type of data is typically collected from the US Census Bureau, typically the 10-year census or the American Community Survey. Finally, there's spatial data. Spatial data is useful to show types of land features, regulatory boundaries, land cover, the built environment, and other variables for a specific location. Spatial data is typically represented in maps. We have a lot of online maps available now that are specific to Vermont, and we'll get into some of those later in this training. Okay, so looking at the enabling statute for land use planning in Vermont, and specifically for municipal plans, state statute gives towns fairly broad latitude to gather and incorporate data into their plans. So I'll just read the text where it's starting, where it's highlighted. So where appropriate, and to further the purposes of subsection 4302B of this title, a municipal plan shall be based upon inventories, studies, and analyses of current trends and shall consider the probable social and economic consequences of the proposed plan. Such studies may consider or contain, but not be limited to, population characteristics and distribution, including income and employment, the existing and projected housing needs by amount, type, and location for all economic groups within the municipality and the region, and existing and estimated patterns and rates of growth in the various land use classifications and desired patterns and rates of growth in terms of the community's ability to finance and provide public facilities and services. Now, that sounds like a lot. Most of those examples given in 1, 2, and 3, many of those represent those quantitative data sets. You know, their households, population, what kind of employment is occurring, where people are employed in town. And it's important, I've highlighted shall and where appropriate for a reason. The use of shall is important in that a plan needs to be based on data. However, where appropriate, we want to use data, we need to use data, but we want to make sure that that data is reliable and that the data is accurate. And we'll get into this a little more when we talk about American Community Survey data, because often what we find with very small towns with smaller populations is that the margin of error for the American Community Survey data goes up significantly for many data sets, and this can indicate that the data is not reliable and probably shouldn't be used in the plan. And we'll get into sort of how to parse out which data sets can be used and which can't a little later. The key here is that discretion is needed essentially for what data to include and what data to leave out. Okay, so a little more on the town plan. The town plan is primarily a visioning document. The plan looks forward over an 8-year period and develops a set of goals, policies, and recommendations for ways a town can more closely align with where it would like to be. We need to ensure data is supportive and complementary and not overwhelming to the plan. There's a ton of information available out there, and we need to be careful about collecting that data, making sure that it's reliable, and how that data and information is included in the plan. It's important to note that data should play a supporting role to the narrative and policies in the plan. It should not become the central feature. So data supports the narrative and the policies. You know, I've seen plans where you have pages and pages of charts and graphs, and it's important to know which of those help to tell a significant story, help to further the narrative, and which of those don't. So we get to the small town data dilemma. I've alluded to this earlier in the presentation. For many of the smaller towns in a region, there's often little reliable data from the American Community Survey. The American Community Survey, as I said, is part of the US Census, and often the count or percentage given for a particular data set is so small that it can make the margin of error larger than the estimate itself. On top of this, there are usually few reports, studies, or analyses conducted at the town level, so it can be difficult to really get more fine-grained, accurate data for many towns. And I've included just an age cohorts table, circling it with the laser pointer. And this is from 2010, so nothing recent, but it's to give an example of, you know, you've got the estimate, and the estimate is this green line, or the green bar, for different ages in Granville over, so you've got under 5 all the way up to 85 years and older. And the green, again, that's the estimate, and the red, or the pink, is that margin of error. So you think the estimate, maybe for 10 to 14-year-olds, is about 8, plus or minus 6. So that means you could have maybe 14, or you can have 2 people in that age group. So this is an example of maybe where the data may not be reliable enough to work with. Finally, data needs to be conveyed effectively. The best data is simple to understand, it conveys a significant message, and integrates well with the narrative topic. And Pete, would you like to just briefly discuss some of the ACS 5-year window, margin of error?
Sure. Excuse me. Sure. Yeah, this is unfortunately what we got now. We used to have a combination of a slightly better version of this and the long form, which was basically additional data they collected when they did the census, but they don't do that anymore. And they took what they were doing kind of in addition to the long form between the censuses, between the decennial census, and made it a little bit bigger, but not much, and it's kind of shrinking as time passes. So the census data is nice because we get that every 10 years, and that's actually a census where they try to visit everyone and get a bunch of data from them. But in between these 10 years periods, what do? We have something called the American Community Survey. And people all over Vermont get this. It's a select version of a select set of households every year, and it's about 14,000 households in Vermont per year. In fact, my in-laws in Rutland have done it once. So it does actually happen. It's real, but 14,000 households per year in Vermont total. And so you can imagine, there are more than 14,000 households in Chittenden County, easy. So it's not sampling very many people. And in a county like Orange or Windsor, there's only probably a few hundred or a few thousand households, depending on the year. So in order to make the data a little better, what they do for small areas is they take multiple years and kind of smush it using algorithms and models. And it's pretty advanced modeling and stuff, but because it is modeling with a small number of data points, you get these large margins of errors for really small towns. And most Vermont communities, with the exception of maybe Hartford in our region, qualify as pretty small. So you have to use a lot of smarts when you're using this data. What's really nice about how they display the data is if you play with the data profiles that you can get to right on our website on each town page in the census profiles, they pull up the ACS data, is they show you these margins of error and you can see them. But when you actually look at them, you see that there may go, like, your value might be 20 houses in the town of Granville have propane heat, but the margin of error is from 0 to 50. And that's the 95% confidence interval. So it could be anywhere from no houses, and they're equally sure about all these values, have 0, or 50 houses have 0. So kind of have propane. So either 0 houses have propane or 50 houses have propane, and everything in between. So it's kind of like, gosh, what do I do? And there's not a lot you can do with this data. We'll talk about some ways to deal with it, maybe some other sources. Kyle will talk about that, which are really good ideas, but it's a tough data set. And again, you have this, it's not like you're looking at, one thing I always tell people, you're not looking at 2023 data. When you report the data, when you're using it, you have to say, well, I'm using the 2017 to 2022 data period for the American Community Survey surveys that were given out to Vermonters. So it's hard to explain to people, and it's a little goofy, but it's all we got for small areas. Now, when you get to the county level and for bigger cities, they do the same thing, but because each county has enough people, Orange County, Windsor County, Rutland County, Addison County, they do an American Community Survey every year, but only at the county level, and basically Rutland or larger. It needs 25 to 50,000 people or larger. So that's all of Vermont's counties and its big cities. You can get data that's sampled over the course of 1 year for, I don't know how many tens of thousands of people in Vermont. So that's pretty good. But again, you're not going to be able to figure out individual pieces of information about a small town in Vermont using this data. It'll give you a general sense of a range, but for some of our real small towns, you can't even do that. But that doesn't mean there aren't ways to get at this information. So take it away, Kyle.
All right, thank you, Pete. And just kind of adding to what Pete said, there are, I think if you're looking at the real basic data sets, if you're looking at population, housing units, where all of the numbers are kind of, it's just one number, you're increasing that sample size. You're saying, okay, in town total, how many do we have here? And so those can be a bit more reliable. Um, it's really when you get into the very fine-grained types, and I've provided two examples here on the screen. On the left, got Granville vacant housing unit status, and that's from 2017 to 2021, and you can see the name of the table there. And it's showing, the green bars essentially are the estimate, and this black line is that margin of error, that plus or minus. So you can see for many of these, we can't, there's no data to go on. So vacant housing units for rent, for example, you've either got 35 or zero. That's a huge difference, and it doesn't tell us anything. Um, if we look at Topsum and employment by industry, again, we're trying to break down a small population into a large number of different types of employment, and you have the same problem. You end up having a margin of error that says for if you're in other services or this one right here, you're either at 50 or zero. Again, it's not giving us um, that information that we're looking for. Um, so, and just to note, we've linked the U.S. Census to this PowerPoint, or the data census.data.gov to this PowerPoint. And you can look and explore the data sets. And what's nice about them, once you're familiarized with them, it will show the estimate right next to that margin of error. And it often also provides the percent next to the percent margin of error. So just looking at it on the website can give you a good understanding, if you're looking at an estimate of 50 households with a margin of error of 30, that's really big. And so that's a good way to kind of say, okay, this isn't a great sampling.
Yeah, if your margin of error is almost as big as your reported count or bigger.
Which is often the case.
Yeah, that's a red flag. Just stop.
Yep. So, now that we've discussed the American Community Survey, it can be inaccurate in many ways. We have very limited census numbers. We have census numbers come out every 10 years, 2010, 2020, and it's only for households, population, and housing units. So those are the only numbers we get. And those are accurate, but it's limited. So another way to get local accurate data is to develop a survey. So planning commissions, affordable housing committees, other town committees can put together surveys that can help answer important planning related questions for your town. There are many opportunities and challenges to developing a survey. If you can get 50 to 100 households to complete the survey, it can provide more accurate data than can be obtained through the ACS. Your sampling is going to essentially go through the roof. And when you get the survey results, those results can be directly tied in to support for a plan. For example, if what's nice about surveys is you can put in both demographic questions and policy related questions based on current issues that you're grappling with, and you're wondering, okay, what policies or actions should we add to our plan? you know, a big issue today is the short-term rental market for a lot of towns. This is a big discussion topic. And if you can put in a well-crafted question on residents' perceptions of that policy issue, it can either say, oh, you know, there's a lot of support for regulations around this, or it can say, well, you know, a lot of people think that, you know, not regulating it's okay. Um, and so that can provide a strong foundation for policy decisions that go into the plan. We have a lot of example surveys available or that have just been used in the past. I've kind of put some screenshots in here just showing some uh, town plan surveys that have been done before. So there are examples of, you know, template language, questions that have been asked. You want to include a number of demographic questions just so you know who's responding and that you're getting a balanced response from across demographic groups. There are some challenges to developing a survey. There's a lot of initial work up front to evaluate and choose those survey questions, crafting those questions around certain, you know, policies that you're considering can take up a lot of time. There are logistical challenges in making the survey available to residents. Is it a paper survey? Are you doing it digitally? Is it a hybrid? And then how, if it's hybrid, how are you taking those paper surveys and putting them back into the digital platform? And then, as I mentioned a little earlier, it can be difficult to get responses from a broad spectrum of demographic groups. You might get 100 responses to the survey, and then you find out that 80% of them are from people over the age of 50. And so that's a good example of a data gap where you know you might need to brainstorm and find other ways to get younger people or uh, you know young families to respond to the survey as well. So there are a lot of great opportunities for developing a survey. It's a lot of work involved, but it can really pay off and it can give you a lot of great data. Okay, yeah, and other great town data, Pete, if you want to go into this, because this involves you know, the grand list and zoning and that sort of thing.
So, towns are required to do some stuff and through other programs, and through those other programs, they kind of inadvertently collect a lot of good data. Probably the best set of data is through their function as a taxing authority. So they have to, in order to collect property taxes, do it as equitably as possible. And in order to do that, they have to collect a lot of information about each property to make sure they're taxing it equitably. And all that data is available to a town and to potentially planning commissioners and other folks. It may not be really easy to access, but it is there and you can get to it eventually. The base level grand list data is available pretty easily nowadays through, you know, like the state parcel viewer and other places. The more advanced data, like all the assessment data about each property, is there too. It's harder to get to because it's usually embedded in the town's CAMA system. That stands for Computer Assisted Mass Appraisal. Towns use different CAMA programs, which is the reason it can be hard to access, but it is there. You could potentially use that data to find out accurately how each home in your town is being heated, potentially, if your listers collected that information and they, if they're doing detailed level assessments with an advanced CAMA system and, you know, proper assessing guidelines they should be. So it's that data's there. It may not, your town listers are busy people. They're horribly underpaid, horribly overworked. And people don't treat them as well as they should be treated because they're the taxing authority. But you could talk to them. They might not have time to help you, but you may be able to talk to the person, the vendor who supplies their camera program to get at this data. But again, your listers are super busy. It's not their job necessarily to spend a bunch of time providing data to the planning commission or somebody else, but there is data out there in that realm. If your town has zoning or other or access permit information for town highways, all that data, if the town is tracking it in a reasonable digital fashion, is available. If they don't track it that way, you might have to pound the file cabinets for a bit, but that data is there and you can get at it, but it may take some work. Again, these are great data sources because they're town-based. They're usually well maintained, but they may not be easy to access. And something you can think about, and most towns are starting to do this. There's been digital record keeping grants for town records and other things that some towns have accessed and scanned some of their town records. PVR is in the process. That's property valuation and tax review. Part of the tax department is in the process of streamlining and upgrading and standardizing the grand lists and CAMA management systems across all the towns. So, in the next 5 to 10 to 15 years, these management systems will be a lot easier to access and a lot more straightforward for the rest of us to get at the data inside them to use to help us make intelligent policy decisions. But again, it's kind of hard because we know the data's there, but it can be tough to get to, and the listers don't have a lot of time to help you, or the zoning administrator who works only, 1 day a week is not going to be, wanting to stay late and help you go through the file cabinets.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about different forms of data collection, but it's not only how data is selected, it's also how the data is presented. Effective presentation can clearly illustrate the significance of the data set, and it can help to inform a narrative rather than just throwing numbers or charts into a plan. So here I've provided 2 examples of different bar charts. One is taken from the one on the left here, is essentially a comparison. It's taking 2 American Community Survey data sets, housing need and housing stock. And it's comparing them. It's saying, okay, we tend to have very small households. How many bedrooms do we have per house? And Hartford's a larger town, so this data set was actually a little more accurate because we were working with a larger population. But it's a great way to visually show that there looks to be a mismatch between our household size and the size of our homes. This second data set is taken from housingdata.org, and this is an excellent resource. You can go to housingdata.org, search through the different types of data that they have, and it creates the charts for you. And you can choose by county, by town. You can compare across towns. So here I've taken the ratio of town level home prices to county incomes. So that's essentially saying how much is a home in the town and is it affordable based on that county income? And it gives you this nice line, the affordability limit. So you can really make a comparison across different towns and look at how affordable housing is. You get above that affordability limit, and the higher you go, the less affordable it is in that town. Got two more data sets here. This one on the top left is it's in our regional plan, our current regional plan, and this one's great because it's often effective to show a change in demographics over time, because that's indicating a trend. It's indicating where we're heading, and that can inform the narrative. It can inform where do we think we'll end up in 2020 if this is the direction that we're going, and what kind of services do we need? What kind of housing are we looking for? And so it's showing essentially that the 55 years and older, the households that are 55 and older are going up, while everyone else, all the other households, are slowly dropping. And so again, it can feed into the narrative, and in looking at what the future needs are for the population, in this case in Vermont. Finally, a use of spatial data, Pete mentioned the Vermont parcel layer, taking the residential parcels for Hartford and displaying them by residential housing type. And so this is just a great way to look at, okay, where are the different types of housing located in town? Where do we have condominiums, which are these light blue in here? Where do we have a lot of multifamily, which tends to be in this White River area? You can see that all of this red, those are parcels categorized as single family residential. So the predominant form of residential land use categorized is as single family. The key here is that we want to keep the data simple and clear. You really want to make the use data that informs the narrative. You want to use color, size, and symbols effectively. And you only incorporate data, again, as I said, that conveys a significant message. Okay, so now we're getting into the mapping portion of the training. Pete, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Well, mapping has pretty much caught up with all the online data. You can do most of it online now, and it's nice because you can zoom right into your road or whatever, and it's harder to do on a PDF. And you can, once you figure it out, it's not easy the first few go arounds, depending on what viewer you're using, figure out how to turn the various layers on and off, and then it gets pretty useful. And then once you get things kind of the way you want them, what I do is just do a screen capture, and then you can put that in your grant application or send it to a town citizen who had questions or whatever. The big kind of four are something called flood ready at vermont.gov. There's the parcel viewer. You can just Google parcel viewer Vermont. Most people are familiar with the ANR Natural Resource Atlas. That has a lot of layers in it, but there's a drop down in the upper left-hand corner that has various themes that can make turning layers on and off a little less daunting. BioFinder is kind of another version of that talks about forest blocks and stuff. And then VTrans has many online maps, as well as a lot of PDF maps of their highway system. And most good state agencies will have PDF maps of their village centers, or like I said about VTrans, of the general highway map. That's all available. And some of those are regulatory and statutory sources for the mapping information, especially like the VTrans town highway maps and the flood maps. So you need to go to those PDFs to do your final checks. And those are the, you know, source that you need to refer people to if they need to make a decision. You can obviously use online versions to help you, but the final say are those formal PDFs. And if you want a special custom map, you know, that Kyle or me or someone else can make, we could do that, but it does take time. It's not, we don't have everything all pre-made. Some things we do, and it doesn't take too long, but other things may take a little longer. And the more customizations you want, the harder it gets. So that's kind of where we're at with mapping. But I would encourage you to like maybe start out with the parcel viewer and then move up to the, you know, the flood ready or the ANR natural resource atlas and get used to turning on and off layers and taking a few screen caps. And then you can really start to leverage some of these cool online mapping resources. So this is the classic, and this is super important because this is the source for all the town highway information and the town highway numbers and the mileages and what class the roads are for all sorts of things, for how much aid this towns get from the state, where and what kind of bridges there are, where there are legal trails, and where there are class 4 roads. And I love with these maps, people pull them out and they're like, well, that's not right. And I'm like, well, this is the record that VTrans has. If it doesn't seem right to you, you need to follow the proper process to update this, and you need to go to your select board and tell them where it's wrong. And then you can work with them to verify, you know, the area that you feel there's a problem with. And then through a set statutory process, it happens actually next month in April, you can make changes with sketches. And if you can find or do some new surveys, and then mark up the map and submit the information to VTrans. And then if you have questions about town road names and town addresses, you work with your E911 coordinator and you submit that stuff to the E911 board. So there's all a bunch of processes and programs that handle these things. I always get a lot of requests from people. Can you just change the map? That road name is wrong. Well, you might be right, but I don't know if you're right. And there's no way for me to verify that. And you just have to be careful and cognizant of the proper procedure to do the updates. But these maps are super important. There's like the Kyle can talk about the floodplain maps. These are the maps of record for their specific subject matter, and you should, you know, get familiar with them, understand how the town highway numbers have different circles and squares and dotted circles and squares around them that mean things. And it's, as you can see on this one, there's a massive key. Get familiar with it and learn about it, and we can help you with that.
This is just a zoom in of that. We've got a key here. And then, yeah, a zoom in of an inset map of Silver Lake and Barnard. I know I've just to add on to what Pete said, I've used if your zoning ever has different standards for class 4 roads, this map is a great reference because it shows if a road's a class 3, a class 4. So it's a great way to say, okay, does this development trigger a certain review or not? Uh,
Yeah, we talked about that.
yeah.
No. Yeah.
Don't do it.
Don't do it.
Okay, so now we're getting into the flood insurance rate maps. The short term for it is a firm. Um, and knowing where to find this map and how to use it is important for anyone involved with town planning. Depending on your county, firms are available either on the FEMA Map Service Center or as a digital layer that can be found on the Vermont ANR Atlas and on Flood Ready. The firm is important for locating areas that may be at risk of flooding, such as along rivers, lakes, or large streams. It's also important for local enforcement of flood regulations. The map essentially it delineates the special flood hazard area, which is the sort of regulatory boundary for any development within that falls within the flood zone and the flood regulations kick in. It's also important for determining whether certain structures are in the mapped floodplain. So, and thus where structures are regulated under the local flood regulations. Finally, it's important for banks and insurance agents, determining the need and rates for flood insurance. Anyone purchasing a home, getting a mortgage in a flood zone is required to have flood insurance. So it's very important in that regard. I'll just note that FEMA occasionally updates the maps, and they're doing so right now for Vermont. We'll likely get new flood maps in the next few years. So the boundaries of the flood hazard areas may change a little, they may change a lot, but those maps are on the way. So the paper flood map, as I mentioned, it's available for download from the FEMA Map Service Center. I've linked it here. If you're in Orange County, this is likely the map that you will be relying on. For now, the digital firm, otherwise known as a D firm, are available on the ANR Atlas, which I'll cover more in just a moment. The paper firm can be difficult to interpret. As you can see, I've provided a close-up screenshot. It doesn't give you a lot of reference points. This is taken from Stratford. You've got a couple of roads shown, but not many. No building footprints to give you an indication of what you're looking at. And often, it's not facing north. North is going that way. So if you're trying to kind of correlate this map with another map, you got to make sure that they're both facing the right direction. All of this can complicate interpretation. So if you're unsure of whether existing or proposed development is located in the map flood areas, you can contact the Regional Planning Commission, us, or the state floodplain manager. And just as a helpful note, when you're getting the paper map, the paper firm from the FEMA Map Service Center, you type in, you go that link, you type in your town name, you put in VT, you search, and often there will be multiple panels. So in Stratford's case, there are 5, and this means that the map is printed in 5 separate documents essentially. So you have to download all of them to have all of the delineated flood hazard areas for the town. So just making sure you don't download one and think that's for the entire town. You want to make sure you download all of the firm panels. All right, and so now on to the natural resources, Vermont Natural Resources Atlas. It's another useful tool for planning, zoning, and land development review. I use it a lot for zoning administration, especially around, finding those steep slopes, class 1 and 2 wetlands. I've listed those here. If you have a digital firm, you can see it on the ANR Atlas. What's great about this is you can zoom in and see, okay, what structures are in that flood area, that flood hazard area. It makes it very easy to make those determinations. You can also look at land cover. I've provided this image down here. You can look at the forest blocks and habitat connectors, soils as well. And you can also upload local GIS shape files and other spatial data. You can do that temporarily in the ANR Atlas just to compare if you have an overlay district and you want to see if a certain development will fall within that, you could upload that overlay shape file and see how that aligns with what's on the ground. And so in summary, the ANR Atlas is useful for layering data sets to develop a better understanding of an area. The Atlas allows you to turn on multiple data sets all at once. And you can also, if you get real savvy, you can change the order of them to see, to have one on top of another or vice versa. The Atlas is also useful for identifying what local constraints might impact future development in a location. As I mentioned before, is like steep slopes, floodplains, or wetlands. You can have all of these layers on all at once to see how they overlay on top of each other, and see if there are multiple constraints to development. And I've also mentioned you can upload local GIS layers, and I've provided a short little guide here. Essentially, if you don't know where to find that GIS layer, you can go to this link here, and that sends you to the Vermont Geodata portal, and you can look up your town in the search menu, and typically zoning, if you have zoning, or if you have other, overlay layers, those will come right up. So you can select the zoning data set and you can download the shape file. And then in the ANR Atlas on the top right-hand corner, there's this little tools button. And if you click that, it opens up this panel here. And if you look at map data, you click map data, you can then go to upload data. And then you just take that data set that you download from geodata.vermont.gov, you throw it in here, you click upload, and it will appear as a layer on the map. And then you can add additional layers as well. So we're wrapping up, but I've provided a list of some of the most useful data sources. They're the ones that I typically always turn to. It's a mix of these quantitative data sets like the US Census Bureau, housingdata.org, and some of these mapping tools, such as Vermont Center for Geographic Information, VTrans highway maps. One that we haven't talked about, the ANR Community Reports tool. This is great for just seeing, okay, how many residential structures do we have in the floodplain? What is our ERAF status? And ERAF stands for Emergency Relief Assistance Fund. You know, do we have our local hazard mitigation plan adopted? Do we have the town road and bridge standards adopted? It's just a great tool to look at and see, okay, what is the status of all these different uh, plans and other tools that we have. All right, so that wraps up the training. As I mentioned, this PowerPoint will be available um, following the training, so I can send it to all of you. Here's my contact information. Please reach out to me if you have any data related questions, mapping related questions. If for whatever reason I can't answer it, I'll throw the question to Pete and hope that he can. But now I'd just like to open things up to questions if anyone has any. And yeah, thank you all for attending.
I have a quick question, Kyle.
Yeah.
For larger copies of these maps, is that something that I know you provide some, but I know you're probably limited on how many you can supply, but are these things, I mean, do you have any recommendations of where we could go to get prints, or would you like requests just to come to you and you can say, yes, we can do that, or no, we can't, and if we can't, maybe you can get it done here? Or I don't know if you have any recommendations for that.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Generally, we can print larger maps. We're happy to do it. I don't think we could print like 50 copies, but
Yeah.
if you need one or two, then that's easily something we can do. And so yeah, you just want to reach out to us and say, hey, I'm looking for a larger zoning map. Or or a map of the flood hazard areas only. And that's probably something we can put together. When it gets to more, if we start to get into, well, we want the legend over here, we want this to be this color and that line to be a little bigger, then that gets a lot more complicated. As Pete says, it's not like editing a Word document. But yeah, if it's, these typical zoning maps or these layers that are readily available, we can put together a map pretty quickly and print a large copy of it. All right.
If you want a whole bunch of something, we can print a lot, but if you want 24, 2x3s foot staples, we'll do that. And it's not a big deal. There's a couple, I think in Barry and in Leb, like print shops, like there's one, anything printed in Tapsville, and they all have large format plotters.
Cool.
Okay, well, I have a.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Danny. We're going to ask the same question, so go ahead, Danny.
Go ahead. No, you ask. Go ahead.
Access to the ANR database. And Danny, this is where you can help me out. You get to a certain point and you need a subscription, right?
Well, it's for the software. You need a subscription to use the software and be able to create maps that you might be ongoing that you're working on. So in order to save a map, you need a subscription to the software, I believe. How do we, what support is available for town officials to be able to do that?
You can save maps, and I think you can save like your kind of environment in the Natural Resources Atlas and come back later. Like it's, I haven't done it in a long time, but there are ways to do that.
I don't think you can create a map and work on it. In other words, and do drawing, measuring.
You
So forth.
can, but you may not be able to come back to it again.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. But you can save your environment and come back to it again. If you really want to do that, you could, if you're just like a conservation commissioner, you can buy a subscription to the industry standard one that's integrated into the geodata portal. That's an option. If you're super motivated, I don't recommend that. I would recommend like learning QGIS. The learning curve will be a lot steeper, but you'll be a lot happier. So it's you know, your greatest strength is your greatest weakness type of situation.
What was that again? QGIS?
QGIS. Yeah, Google it.
Okay.
Pete, is that because it sounds like it's related to ArcGIS. Is there
Yes, right.
a fee associated with it, or is that kind of
No, the reason
Okay.
I mention it is it's absolutely free. And there are tons of resources online, tutorials and stuff. Whereas ArcGIS, which is the industry standard, you can get like, I think it's $250 for a year to be like a home user for your community.
Right.
But if you need to start doing regular things for the town, or for other folks, that's illegal on that subscription. So yeah. The fees for that are, I think it might cost you like $1 to $2 grand to buy, and then a few hundred per year to maintain. And that's totally doable if you want to. But a lot of really small towns don't want to spend that money. And but if you're motivated to make really nice maps with GIS data, learn QGIS. It's just the way to go.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Any additional questions?
Yeah, real quickly, one more. You mentioned you have examples of surveys, and we will be in this winter, constructing a survey. What's the best approach to TRORC for us when that time comes? It should be not too far off. Just to get sample surveys that you have from the past, or ideal surveys that might live out on the web somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, we can send you some example surveys of what's been done before. And that's just a good way to get started and looking at some of like, okay, this is how these questions have been formulated. Do we like that, or do we want to tweak it in some way for, the policy language we're looking for is a little different from what's here. You can also, I suggest looking at the digital survey platforms. Actually, I'm blanking on I think it's Microsoft Forms is one. And I think that's included with 365. So if you have Microsoft 365, there's that. And just making sure that whatever platform you use, you can extract the survey and print it as a paper copy in case people are unfamiliar with the digital survey format, they want to fill in a paper version. Or you may just decide, we're just going to go with the digital version. That's what we're doing. But typically, you may send it out as a mailer to all of the households in town. And you can get a lot of responses that way. So if you take a hybrid approach, you're creating some more work for yourself, because in the end you have to consolidate everything back together. So it would involve a lot of data entry, but if the goal is to get a lot of feedback, getting a survey to every household in town via mail is a sure way to make sure that everyone's at least received a copy. And then being able to, with the digital form, you can create a QR code and you can put it on a poster, or you can provide a link in the listserv. You can just make it very easy to respond that way as well.
Great, thank you. I did notice, just parochially, that you had the Bethel survey. It was showed on the slide. I think it was from 2008.
Yep.
But if that's still available, we no one can seem to find our latest, the one we sent out probably in 2017, maybe something like that. But if you really have a stash of those somewhere, let me know.
That's
we'll dig into it.
The 2017 survey.
I think so. I think that was the last year.
Okay, we can see if there's one. We can see. Yeah, I can poke around and see if that's there. I also provided a link on that slide. I have to go back a little. We created a technical brief. This was a little while back on community planning surveys. So
good.
That'd be
Okay.
a good place to start.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll forward the slideshow to everyone tomorrow.